Nations travels to countries that do not exist, which is part of our current exhibition Beyond States, The Boundaries of Statehood. You'll find information about the exhibition and opening hours on the museum website and on debatorial.de. With me here today is Dominik Busch, who will be happy to take your questions and comments. My name is Frauke Stengel. I am head of marketing here at the Zeppelin Museum and a passionate world traveler. But I have to admit that today's guest will put my traveling experience to shame. We welcome Guilherme Canever, who is joining us today from Curitiba, Brazil, to talk about his travels to unrecognized nations, countries that do not exist, and the book of the same name, which was published in 2018 and translated into English last year. Before he introduces you to countries and regions you might know from the news or you've probably never heard of, let me briefly introduce him. Guilherme was born in 1976 in Curitiba, Brazil. He started traveling at a young age. He was about 3 years old when he crossed his first border to neighboring Argentina and Uruguay on a road trip with his mother and sister. Since airplane travel was still expensive in the 1980s, the family traveled mostly by car and did camping trips within Brazil and South America. The family traveled mostly by car. Continents and different cultures was awakened early by his grandfather, who worked as a professor for geology at the local university and whose work took him around the world. Most of his research was conducted on the African continent, which young Guilherme got to know through slides and pictures shown by his grandfather. However, his academic career initially took him in a different direction. He studied forest engineering and holds a master's degree in logistics and project management. He made a career in brand and product development and real estate. Until in 2009, when he left his job to travel the world for a year. 1 year became 3, and traveling became his life. Today, he has visited over 130 countries. He travels alone, with his wife and children, or with friends. He visits destinations that are the most different to his own daily life, that teach him about foreign cultures and completely put him out of his comfort zone. He likes to journey beyond the tourist bubbles, go to places where he can interact with people, travels off the beaten track, and strives to come back from a trip with more questions than answers. So in 2009, the same year he started his journey around the world, he also visited his first unrecognized nation, Somaliland at the Horn of Africa, and was for the first time confronted with the question, what is a country? Travels to Palestine and Western Sahara then solidified the plan for the Unrecognized Nations Project, which would in the end include 16, and I'm carefully using quotation marks here, countries. So far, he has written 4 books about his travels, which are very successful in Brazil. The English version of Unrecognized Nations, Travels to Countries That Do Not Exist, brought him international attention and was covered in the media of more than 40 countries. Before I turn the floor over to Guilherme, let me just say again, as always, we welcome your interaction. Please feel free to send us your comments and questions on the platform from which you are watching us today. The Debatorial chat, Facebook, YouTube, email us at debatorial@zeppelin-museum.de or message our Telegram group. You may do so in German, English, or Portuguese. Again, a very warm welcome to Guilherme, and the floor is yours.
Hello, Frauke, Dominik. It's a pleasure to speak with you in the Zeppelin Museum. Good evening to all the audience. So I'll start my presentation talking about what Frauke already said a bit, is this unrecognized nations. This was the project that I started that ended up being the book at the end. But I didn't write a book. I didn't travel to these destinations to write a book. It ended up happening this way. So while I was traveling in Africa, I discovered I knew about Somaliland, but I didn't know that it was possible to visit safely. So I was traveling overland from Cape Town to Cairo. Once I arrived in Ethiopia, I figured out that it was possible to visit Somaliland, and it was the first unrecognized nations that I visited, and a very special one, because out of all the countries that these breakaway territories that I'm going to talk about, this one is not being recognized by any other nation, not even non-recognized nations. It just started a few weeks ago, a few months ago, to get closer to Taiwan, to the Republic of China, but it's not something that is being, a solid recognition. So to go to Somaliland, I had to visit the embassy office in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and grant a visa for Somaliland. If I had a visa for Somalia, it wouldn't work. Somaliland used to be a British colony, while Somalia was Italian colony. And they united to be the Somalia that we know on the map. But then after they had a civil war and they became independent since 1991. So it's been a long time. And they grant this independence. And when you go there, you need the visa, you do your passport control, you got their own stamp. To travel there, you need to exchange money into Somaliland shillings. And then I start to think, if a coin, a currency is accepted, it has some value. So there's no inflation or something. So it's the current currency. So you don't go to the banks, you go to these boxes, the wire boxes on the street, and you change money. And this amount of money that I have in my hands, I exchange for about $10 US dollars. And they are very proud of this independence. So they have to celebrate a very special place, downtown Hargeisa, the capital. There's this MiG airplane that they shot down from the Somalia Air Force. And they shot down, have their daily life as a regular country. They do wherever other country people would do. There are some interesting things to see, like the animal market, the gold market. But one of the main tourist attractions of the place is the Lasgel rock cavings. If it was in any other country, it would be maybe UNESCO heritage site, but there are no tourists at all. You have to go a little bit outside of the capital. Actually, it's between Hargeisa and Berbera, the second city. And to go there, you need a police escort. So it's a peaceful place. You should not worry that much if you have the correct information, but then you need the police escort. So you can see that there is some conflict in the air, and they say that it's just to protect the foreigners. But it costs about, it's more than 10 years ago, but it costs $10 for me per day. And I think it's some way to get money into the country as well. And you have to visit the government officials. You see that the institutions works well and they are improving. And one of my favorite things to do while traveling is to sit, to have tea. They drink like chai, tea with milk, and interact with people. And of course, I read, I look for the commentaries, to implement, especially when I wrote the book. But a lot of the information that I got from local people, daily life. So it was easy because of being a British colony. They spoke English. So it was quite easy to communicate and ask questions, how they felt for not being recognized, and how the difficulties and what happened in their daily lives. So it was in the Horn of Africa. It's very, very hot. So afternoon, we always had tea and waited for a few hours, and we could read the local newspaper written in English. I crossed from Berbera to Djibouti through the desert, and the car that we were driving had problems. We had to spend the night at the desert, and I really started to think, what was a country and how many countries existed? I didn't start the project to visit all the other unrecognized nations, but I always say that this was the seed. I remember at night looking at the sky and having these questions. And I was in a big world tour, but came to my mind, how many countries? We always hear about United Nations having 193 member states. There are 2 other observer states, that's Palestine and the Vatican. But if we look at the history of the United Nations, Switzerland only became a member state in 2002 because they wanted to be neutral on conflicts or something. So no one would say that before 2002, Switzerland didn't exist. So why the United Nations is the club that determines which is a country and which one it's not. It's something that I start to think about. And then in the football, the soccer affiliation, FIFA, there are 209, maybe now 10 or 11, but we used to be 209. The Olympic Committee, 206 countries. ISO codes for 245 regions. And the one that probably someone in Germany don't know, but for the United States, you know, the American visa, when you need to apply, Brazilians need to apply, you have 250 countries of origin to mark, where you are from. So it kind of, you know, blow your mind when you think, what is a country? How many countries? Huh? And then if you go through international law, any region with permanent population, defined territory and border controls, if they have the ability to govern independently, and it's not necessary because it can have some sanctions or something like that, but the ability to have a relation with other countries, it's also very important. So I visit other countries before I created the project, but always having this on mind. And to become independent in the United Nations Charter, you know, in 1945, the first article, paragraph, second paragraph, there's the right of self-determination. So it's one of the first things in the charter is that people, you know, one nation should be able to self-determine themselves as a country. But in the same document, same charter, not far ahead, there is the territory inviolability. So all the member states of the United Nations, they protect themselves by international law that they should not lose territory. So there's a conflict of laws here. And that's how most of the conflicts started. Huh? That you see that both sides have some rights if you look into international law. So I came across 10 countries de facto independent. So 10 countries that are independent, but with limited international recognition. On my book, I also added a few places that like Tibet, Kurdistan, and other regions. Some of them even have government outside of the country, like Tibet, that they have in India, in Dharamsala, but they are not independent. So these 10 countries, they are independent, even if they are not recognized. So I'll focus more on those nations and not the other separatist movements and nations well represented with millions of people, but I won't talk about them now. So one very well known because it's in Europe, so it's very easy to see maybe in the news, it's in the Balkans, became independent in 2008. It's a breakaway state of Serbia. And many Europeans would say, oh, but Kosovo is not a country, for even the European Union supports a lot the Kosovo. But in Brazil, if we talk about Kosovo, for Brazilian government, of course not Brazilian people, Kosovo is still part of Serbia, it's Serbian territory. And it's funny that, interesting that in the Olympic Games, Summer Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, 2016, a Kosovar judo fighter won the gold medal in Rio. And when she won the gold medal, They had the national anthem of Kosovo with the Kosovar flag, but for Brazil, Kosovo is Serbia. So it how works geopolitics. And Kosovo is in the Balkans, so have some similarities with the other countries. It's developing quite well with a lot of money from the European Union, United States, and get some tourist attractions. I went there during summer. So like festival, music, cinema. You can notice these old bridges that you look at the Ottoman times with the mosques, a lot of these Albanian people that declared independence. They were Muslims, Albanians. And something that got my attention, that even being an ex-communist country with majority of Muslim people, they are very, very close to the United States. So this is in Pristina, the capital city. They have a square with Bill Clinton statue because the United States leads operation with NATO, that they bombed Belgrade in Serbia without the United Nations Security Council authorization. But there's also, there's Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton stores, and the name is everywhere. There's George Bush Avenue. So they have a very close relation to the United States. And something that I figure out in Kosovo and in other breakaway nations, and that I started to think about borders, it's about when you solve the problem. Because Kosovo, being a minority inside of Serbia, was not something easy for the Kosovar Albanese people. They felt they were not represented, they were persecuted and everything. And they got their independence. But then inside of Kosovo, you can see there on the picture is a church, a Serbian church with barbed wire, and they need security for the Kosovar don't attack the Serbian. So there is still small Serbian communities inside of Kosovo. And when we talk about Serbian communities, they have no relation but cultural with Serbia, the state of Serbia, the country of Serbia. The nation of Serbia is wider. So even in Kosovo, there are Serbians that they always lived on this region for centuries and centuries together with the Kosovar. So just because Kosovo is independent doesn't mean that they need to move to Serbia. The same as the Albanese should not leave the Serbia when Kosovo was Serbia to go to Albania. State is different from nation. So they drew new borders trying to solve a problem, but then the problem just replied inside of this border. Pristina is a very lively city with these water fountains, children, very pleasant. So, but I still, for this full recognition, this problem of the new minorities now, that are the Serbian, need to be solved and they need to be protected. So, but it's a country that it's developing for recognition. More than 100 nations recognized now. And we'll go for a difficult one, a big thorn, that is the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, Arstak, now called as well. I visit this region in 2014. At the time, from time to time, they had some problems, maybe thinking of a new war. 2016 happened again. And finally, last year, the violence escalated, and the map now is completely different than used to be when I traveled there. So without going much further in history, Nagorno-Karabakh is a mainly Armenian, ethnic Armenian enclave inside of Azerbaijan. It's something that was determined during the Soviet time. But if you go further in history, it's very complicated because it's a crossway from different empires. You have the Russian Empire, and then you have the Ottoman, you have the Safavid, the Persians, and all this Caucasus, South Caucasus is in the middle of these empires that changed borders all the time. And Nagorno-Karabakh, that's all mountainous. They have lots of historical Armenian sites and churches and everything. But you always had in history like Azerbaijani that used to take their cattle up in the mountains during summer, and then in the winter they would go down. They crossed those borders. This political border didn't exist for them. And many families for centuries, they used to live together there. And they were neighbors and they got along. Of course, it had some problems if you think in centuries, but they've been living together for long, long time. And even in the neighboring countries, if you think about Georgia, a little bit on the north, Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, used to be called Syphilis. That was the main population there, main ethnic group used to be Armenians more than Georgians. Georgians used to live more in the countryside. And then Yerevan, the capital, what's now the Republic of Armenia, used to be pretty much a Middle Eastern town with a lot of ethnicities and different religions and everything. And then Eastern Anatolia or Western Armenia, where is now Turkey, there is the big historical Armenia, the Armenian of the diaspora that are spread all over the world. So again, we talk about nations that's different than countries and states, political states. So when I crossed the mountains, I crossed from the Sost Pass, not the major way to go to Nagorno-Karabakh, it should be an enclave, was the Lachin Corridor. But I went into a new road from the north. And now when I crossed, it was really difficult to see. I didn't have even passport control. It was really difficult to see when I was leaving Armenia. Because when Armenia won the war, helping Nagorno-Karabakh, they got control of all the land around Nagorno-Karabakh, between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. So these monasteries, I thought I was already in Nagorno-Karabakh, but I was in Azerbaijani land, and I didn't even know. Got to know later. And a lot of tanks and memorials. You can see that the scarves were very, part of their daily life. It was something that they talked all the time. It was pretty much a frozen conflict zone. And you could feel some tension. Even people could get a regular daily life. It's a wall with 100 meters, maybe more, 1,000 car plates of the Azerbaijani vehicles, the cars that had to run away at the time the Armenia occupied the region in Nagorno-Karabakh. This week, we just saw that Azerbaijani did the same, not with the car plates, but with the helmets. It was on the news, the helmets of the Armenian soldiers that died in the last year war when Azerbaijan conquered a lot of land back to them. So there's these provocative things. Once I arrived in Stepanakert, the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh, I had to visit the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get my proper visa. So I entered without visa, without control, and I got this visa. They don't put on your passport because if you can have problem if you visit Azerbaijan later. But even not being my passport, before I published the book, but after I posted a few pictures on the internet, I got problem with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan. So I'm in a blacklist. Maybe I should not try to go to the Baku Formula One. Stepanakert, very lively city. And the people, They have the beer gardens, Wi-Fi on the streets. So you can see maybe what seems like regular life, but it always depends. You as a traveler, you have to watch out from people that you talk and what you see when you're going to talk about your impressions of the place. Because I can go downtown the city and say that it's very peaceful if I didn't see the burned tanks and the war memorials, and not far from there, right on the border of Nagorno-Karabakh, it's one region that just the Azerbaijan army just conquered back. It's called Agdan. It's a city that used to have more than 200,000 people lived there, and it's completely destroyed. It was really difficult to go there because it's very close to it used to be very close to the contact line, what they say, where all the troops were shooting each other from time to time. So this city, 200,000 people, it's like a ghost city now, all devastated. Most of the buildings fell apart. Only these mosques still have the two minarets, the towers that didn't collapse. And it was something really important for the Azerbaijani when they thought about Agdan. So we see that it's something that looked that it wouldn't change. I would never say, oh, this land or this map is going to change. And took a few years, but completely changed. Nowadays, I would not do the same trip, and I could not cross the same borders. So like I said, if you think and talk about the past 100 years, borders will always change for good or for bad. Another one in Europe, the Republic of Transnistria, the breakaway state of Moldova. So there's Romania, Moldova, and then Transnistria, almost Ukraine. They celebrate, the date of independence, not when they won the war against Moldova. For Moldova, they still a part, an autonomous region, but once you cross the Dniester River, you have the passport control, you need your visa, and they have this place with 1792 is when the Russian Empire got this land from the Ottoman Empire. So you see that always these nations, they talk about very, very long time ago. Daily life as well. You have the Lenin statues, you have 25th of October and Karl Marx streets. It's a bit of a Soviet period there. Own currency as well. They have the Transnistrian ruble. I sent a postcard from their home, arrived with the stamp. And very interesting that they have an embassy of Abkhazia and South Ossetia there. So other unrecognized nations, and they make a club of countries that are not recognized, but they recognize themselves. Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, Cyprus, the island, it's supposed to be European Union, but the northern part, you go and you see that you have the Turkish part that was invaded by Turkey. And when Turkey invaded, they said that they were protecting the ethnic Turkic. So they were not from Turkey. They lived there for centuries as well. But it was a political problem. And you can see, again, Famagusta, a ghost town with destroyed buildings and people sunbathing in front. So the war kind of stay in the past and try to have a daily life, even with tourists, is something a bit weird, I would say. You have Nicosia, that's called the last divided capital. So in the middle of the capital, like happened in Berlin before, you to cross from north to south, south to north, you have to present your passport control, barbed wire, and police force. It's very strange feeling. So you have churches that were converted into mosques, always on the side of the northern Cyprus Republic, Turkish Republic. You have the Turkish flag. On the south, the Greek side, you have the Greece flag together. So you see that foreign countries take part on political. Again, I had wonderful hosts on all these countries and try to interact and get to know their daily life. So my host, he was a son of a Turkish father, military, and from a Turkish Cypriot, so from the island mother. Because of that, he could not cross to the southern part of the island. And his cousin that had both parents and father and mother from Turkish Cypriot, he could cross now. So always we see some similarities when you have these foreign forces and politics working together with the ethnic and the nations. So again, when we talk about the end of the Soviet Union, Abkhazia, so a breakaway republic of Georgia, you have a lot of tourist attraction. Novaya Fon is a beautiful monastery. I was quite amazed of many Russian tourists going to the Black Sea, Wi-Fi on the beach, sunny days, botanical garden. You can see this very like with a Lada old car, but they love German cars, BMW, Mercedes as well. So it's also there. A Kornich with restaurants, cafe, culture. So it's a place that works like any other place. The Sahrawi Democratic Arab Republic, Western Sahara, part of this country is occupied by Morocco. While Morocco was a French colony, Western Sahara was a Spanish, dominated by the Spanish. And the Spanish left the region without giving power to anyone. So they always say that is the African last colony, because there is the Polisario Front that try to get and rule this region. And then you have the Moroccans, before even Mauritania tried to claim a piece of land, but Polisario won the war. So a lot of military barracks, if you go in the part occupied by Morocco. They have ancient places like a fortress of the Blue Sultan, and they again go back in time to claim that they are independent region with the Sahrawis. And of course, there were other people there, the Sahrawis, and it's desert. And it was supposed to have a referendum, but then happened the Green March, where a lot of Moroccans walked south to claim the territory, mixed marriage, who would vote on this referendum. So very, very complicated situation. And of course, who suffered the most is the children and the people there. They don't have the right to self-determine themselves. In the middle of the desert, just a few cities or towns outside from the coast. The war escalated there at the end of last year as well. They had a lot of conflicts. Palestine, I won't talk much. I think it has been covered a lot. But yes, we see that Jewish people left the region because of foreign forces, 2,000 years. But the right of return, I think any people from any nationality should be able to travel freely and go and search for a better life. But when they moved back to start the Israel country, there was other people living there, and then who is going to rule? So when you divide again, should you move people from one side to the other like they did in India and Pakistan? This never works because people are connected to the land, not into states. So it's very complicated. You have walls again, like in Western Sahara, there's a very big wall as well with landmines. Palestine with a lot of Christian sites, so it's quite touristic for that. This is not in Palestine, but it's with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, in Shatila. I was much younger. This was before the project, before Somaliland. And Shatila is one place with a lot of Palestinians live. Palestinians that are from the region where is now Israel. So if you move them to what is Palestine now, that is West Bank or Gaza, they won't be home. Even if it's a state for Palestinians, it's not their fathers and grandfathers' land. So that's how complicated and how nations and states and countries are completely different. Always, passport control, crossing border on these regions. This is going back to Israel. It's always tense because there's some conflicts on there in all these places. And we soon will be for some questions. But again, we have a breakaway Republic of South Ossetia that's also in Georgia, also a problem after the end of the collapse of Soviet Union. And South Ossetia, the Ossetians were not the majority on this region. There were a lot of minorities. And yes, maybe they were the majority of the minorities. But again, when you draw the borders, it's very, very complicated because people would cross this border for centuries with no problem being neighbors. But then how it's going to work with the Georgians that used to live in South Ossetia. And again, with some Mercedes, it's not just old Soviet things. They have a regular life, historical places. And one republic of Russia is the Republic of North Ossetia. And then Russia backs South Ossetia. But would Russia back North Ossetia to join South Ossetia to be an Ossetian country? So it's very complicated, even when you talk about these countries that support the segregation. And the Republic of China, that there's not much to say because it's more, they lost the Chinese Civil War for the Popular Republic of China. So they were the nationalistics. And so after the Japanese invasion, Second World War, they had the Civil War and the Communist Party won. And so they left for Taiwan, the island, but they always claimed the whole China. After they even lost the seat in the United Nations in 1971, now they claim more the Taiwan island. It's a country not recognized by many other countries because if you recognize Taiwan, you have problems with China. That's a big economical problem. But they still have a lot of support from the Western world. So it's a country that's developed a lot. And then you can see that when you have interests, even if you don't have a foreign embassy and you say that your country don't recognize, you have international relations and things go well when you have support. So after traveling to these countries, I could talk for hours because it's a long period traveling and all these countries. I wrote a book. It was published in Portuguese in 2016. And then last year, it was published in English and Spanish. And then so I got this international attention to it and was very happy to talk. And I got a lot of messages from all my friends, some good message from my friends, some hate message from people that didn't like what was my perceptions of the place, but this is something that will always happen. And I also wrote 3 other books, 2 about Africa, mostly like Eastern and Western part of Africa, and also from the Silk Road from Turkey to India through the Central Asia. So that's pretty much. I could talk more about it, and I'm happy to talk, but I think I would like to have some interaction with people having some questions, and then I can go deeply into some of these countries or situations. Frau Dominic.
Yes. Thank you, Guilherme, for this fascinating insight into your travels and this amazing project. I actually have lots of questions. I hear the community has lots of questions. I'll just push in front with one of mine because I devoured your book. And yes, despite their own aspirations of being independent, many of the states you visited live in dependency of another country, like Taiwan from China or South Ossetia and Abkhazia from Russia, be it through passports or currencies. Like, what do you think? How strong is, in your opinion, the influence of these recognized nations? And why do you think the unrecognized ones struggle to be recognized by the UN?
Well, it's a lot of these nations, they have fear to protect or to put on side into independence because they might have problem of secession in the future. So you see, even like nations like Spain, they have the Catalan problem, and we still have the Basque problem, and United Kingdom all the time now referendum about Scotland. So it's really difficult even for Russia to support. Okay, they support some breakaway states, but in the past they had like Chechnya and they had other parts of Russia trying to break away. But yes, it's all about geopolitics and international relations, and all these supports, it's related to trade and to geographical influence, oil, gas. So even more than proper ethnic or national, I would say.
Yes, great. Dominic, what does the community want to know?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Guilherme, from my side as well. That was a very interesting talk. And on a slight personal note, I really appreciated that you showed the Bill Clinton statue in Pristina, because that has been part of an artistic work, an artist work that we showed several years ago by Alexandra Domanovic. But coming to the questions from the community, there are quite some questions, actually. And I would start, because you talked about the autonomy and the difficulty of states being accepted, being recognized. And the first question I would like to pose is kind of changing the perspective and asking, how do you think states react when regions claim their autonomy, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think no one wants to lose some land because usually when some region wants to declare independence, there is a proposal on that. And if they think they could deal with independence and they could succeed, the country that owns this territory would think the same. Oh, this is a region with population, where they tax people, they could get income. So no one wants to lose a territory. And that's why there is the charter about the inviolability of the territory. The last country that became was South Sudan. There was a big war and everything 10 years ago. It would be in July 2011. And but after, okay, they settled and they got a referendum, and we got other referendums that were official referendums. And it can happen, but I think usually a country don't want to lose their land, because it's like if we own a house or we own something, we don't want to lose that because we think it's ours, even if it's bigger, if it's a political state. But when you're losing something, you're getting less. So when you think of the capacity to produce, to collect taxes, it's the opposite. Nowadays, it's not more cultural accepted to invade other places and everything like it was in the past. But always a state, if we think in the empires or something, they always wanted to be bigger and to control more territories and everything. So it's the opposite of losing. No one wants to lose.
Right. As a following up question on that, again, changing the perspective, Ellie asked us, in your talks with locals of non-recognized nations, how did you experience their view or feeling of being born there and being able to travel internationally? So what's the people's opinion on their situation?
It does change from people to people, because of course, when you get in contact with local people, traveling abroad is not something that it's easy if you think economical speaking. Huh? So sometimes, even like in Abkhazia, for instance, they have double passports. With the Abkhazian passport, they could go not only to Russia, they could go to Venezuela, Nicaragua. Now I think even in Syria, they just recognized. But then they have the double nationality. So they also have a Russian passport and they can travel. Mm-hmm. So sometimes they were very nationalistic, saying, yes, I have the Russian passport, I can travel, and it doesn't matter if the other countries doesn't recognize it. But then another side, when we're not talking just about traveling, the daily life, most of people just want to be happy, have a regular job, give a future to their children or something like that. So they don't even think about traveling, just want to have, like in Transnistria, some people were like having ice cream, getting married, daily life things. And these daily life things got very complicated because of borders that could not be crossed. And sometimes you have sanctions. So this, I think, is the more complex part of not being recognized. Not just the traveling part or having a strong passport, of course, is important, but this economical part is difficult. And living in a place that is a conflict that can come up anytime. Huh?
It's very interesting because it seems you kind of build bridges to the Christians that are coming in right now. Because Katja asked, as a geography teacher, is it possible to, in quotation marks, classify those nations with a certain stage of development? So did you experience anything about social disparities within those nations?
Very, very complicated. Because we are talking about nations, it's countries in completely geographical, historical, and cultural aspects. They are very different from each other. They just have the same status. So if you see, like in Somaliland, we see a lot of unemployment, and people get migrated to work in foreign countries, mostly United Kingdom. So situation very complex, very difficult. But then you see other places with things like even Abkhazia, of course, there's a lot of money, a lot of support from Russia, but you can go into a wine store and buy some local wine. You can go into a cafe and have some pastry. So some places, you have inside of these nations some disparity. And I think it just happened. But some countries, of course, are richer or poorer because of historical and geopolitical facts.
Okay, actually, I have another question that is motivated by a personal feeling. Because when I'm asked what's my favorite book, I always jokingly answer. And in your book, you actually write that you can buy a passport in Somaliland just at the market, and you mentioned that Abkhazians actually have 2 passports and sometimes dual citizenship, and that the Taiwanese passport is actually very strong, considering that Taiwan doesn't have recognition by all the other countries. So I was wondering, like, what importance do you attach to passports?
Well, I'll say make a parallel. It's if you have like a posh restaurant, a club for the elite, it's classist. Only the rich could go in because they could buy something there, they could trade, and they would benefit from them to coming in. So the Taiwanese is a rich country, even not being recognized. So people, even not recognizing, yes, they want to trade, they want to accept them, because when they accept them, they are getting money from them. They are something that they want. While like the Somaliland, they don't want to. What can Somaliland bring to a rich nation? That's what these other countries think, and that's why they don't want to accept. And you can have a Somaliland passport, but yeah, it's even if you buy, you have pretty much no use for that. But it's quite interesting that I've been following Somaliland in the past 10 years, and it is developing the country with presidential elections, and they have the institutions working and more, and it really works as a country. And I don't think Somalia will take this territory back to them, because I think they have bigger problems inside of Somalia. So it's interesting that Somaliland, that's why I said it's very special place, because it really works as a country, but no one else recognizes. And then China, that's working with all the other African countries, building ports and roads and everything. Maybe they don't support Somaliland because it's a breakaway state. And then China has Tibet, has East Turkestan, the Uyghurs. So maybe they don't want to support separatism. That's why Taiwan found a way to have a place to put foot in Africa with a very important dock, port that is Berbera, that could be a gateway from Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. It makes me think like the passport you actually only need at the border. You know, that for us, it's just a means to an end. We want to cross a border, we want to enter a country. And our exhibition, Beyond States, focuses strongly on borders. And you've seen many countries and you crossed a lot of borders. Is there actually a difference crossing into a recognized country or into an unrecognized one, just considering the actual border?
Yeah, when we talk about passports, it's like sometimes you just present your passport and they stamp you in. Then and when I say that they want you to come there. Sometimes you need a visa. So you need a visa, and then they want to check what you are going to do there. They have some control of who are you, maybe just get some profit of you if you want to go there. So sometimes it's just about buying the visa. But on these regions being conflict zones, sometimes frozen, of course, sometimes nothing will happen. Sometimes not that much, like we saw in Nagorno-Karabakh, that things change fast. But on unrecognized nation zones, the police officers and the army, they are very suspicious. So I never had problems with local people, maybe just one argument or other, about questions. But to go to these countries, I had to do a very deep research. I like to travel without many research before, not many planning, but for these regions, I had to plan a lot, because to go to Abkhazia, I can cross the border from Georgia to Abkhazia, because Georgians say Abkhazia, it's part of their country. But once you cross the bridge, there is a barricade, barbed wire, welcome to the Republic of Abkhazia, army, and then you need to get a permission that you get through internet, a permission to cross this border. Once you get the permission, you go to the capital, and then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get the proper visa. That will be the visa that you can go outside of the country. So there are some tricky borders as well. If you cross from Sochi, place where had the World Cup soccer, football in Russia, also the Winter Games, it's very close to Abkhazia. If you cross this border from Russia to Abkhazia, where Russians do it freely, almost like going to one state to other, if I cross as a foreigner and then later go into Georgia, it's considered an illegal border crossing. So I can have problems. I can could be a fine, could be maybe they could jail me. It's the same thing when I crossed into the occupied territory of Azerbaijan and also into Nagorno-Karabakh, when Azerbaijan discovered that I'm not welcome in Azerbaijan anymore because I crossed a legal border, because I was geographically inside of Azerbaijan, but their authorities didn't let me in. So it's very complicated, the border and political systems. So where you can cross and how you can cross, it changed from place to place. And I really could feel that in the unrecognized nations.
I just have a quick follow-up to something you just said. Like, how do you actually research these trips? Like, what are sources you trust?
Well, I try to compare the most sources that I can have, try to contact local people. Like I said, sometimes I even was hosted by some local people. And this, I think, is really it's important information, because it's not political. It's really from the inside of the community. So local people, then foreign people that might be working there, maybe for international organizations or NGOs, and their own countries, embassies, and political places as well, government. And I try to compare these three, like foreigners, local people, and government, and to get a general idea and try to compare the information and try to think why each one is giving different information, because it's not always the same. So it's quite difficult. Yes, you have to be in some of them, like tensions zones and no conflict zones. You really have to know what you are doing and how far can you go in some of these places. So it needs to be studied a lot.
Okay, Dominic, you have more questions from the community.
It is very interesting to follow the chat and the different chats that we are hosting, and the comments and questions that are being posed. So in terms of difficulties entering a country, somebody drew a relation between a state's wealth and the recognition or their status of recognition of as a state. Somebody talked about that maybe basically it's a change of the geopolitical concept that might be a solution to get rid of borders and borders controls. But I'd like to forward a question or a comment that Dirk has posted, and he wrote, "Hi everybody, I'm a tall, dark-haired and bearded man. It happened to me more often at Western borders, especially USA and Canada, that I had to answer intimate questions about myself. The border guards only let up when my blonde wife joined me. Obviously, I fit into a stereotypical pattern of a suspicious person. Have you had similar experiences?"
It was suspicious sometimes, because they wanted to know what I was going to do there. They always say, "Oh, you are a journalist." They asked me this a few times, because some of those places, it's not that common for tourists to go there. And it's interesting, like I was saying about the sources that I got. When I contacted local people, they were very happy to get people from abroad, and they want to show everything and how the good side of their country. And then the opposite, the army and the police officers, the ones that got the power, they were suspicious, like, what you are doing here? What's your purpose of visit? But why here? So they got suspicious more because of that than for being Brazilians or for my stereotype. And I had a few problems taking pictures as well. Sometimes I had to delete pictures because I took pictures in sensitive places. So yeah, but this was the worst things that happened.
Okay, that's how it should be. Unfortunately, we have already reached the end of our talk. But before we let our guests, our viewers, go home for the evening, there's one final question I just have to ask, because regardless of the pandemic, every traveler keeps studying the world map longingly. So my final question, of course, has to be, where are you planning to go next?
Yeah, it's difficult. In the past year, I haven't been thinking much about traveling, but I've traveled to South and Eastern Africa, Western and Northern Africa as well, and still a very big gap in Central Africa. The closer that I got, it was in Niger. So I would love to go to Chad and Central African Republic, this region. It would be very, very interesting. And I've seen a few people, even now, that should not maybe be traveling that much, but it's one place that there's a window open for traveling now and might not be easy to travel soon. It's Afghanistan. Afghanistan, there's some geopolitical moves at the region now, and Americans are leaving the country. There's some agreements with Taliban, and I know a few people that have been there. It's a place I traveled all around Afghanistan, but not Afghanistan. I would love to go there as well.
Can I join in?
But probably I will stay home for a while.
Yeah, one can dream, one can dream. I don't know about you guys. I'm itching to actually grab my passport and continue to explore the world. It's so big, it's interesting, it's fascinating, full of beautiful, nice people. Thanks again so much, Guilherme, for sharing your experiences, your pictures, and your passion with us. Thanks to you all for watching. Stay safe and stay tuned for more content from the museum, like our upcoming lecture on April 29th. This one will be held in German again, so I will do a quick announcement in German. Am 29. April um 19 Uhr wird Sie Jürgen Bleibler mitnehmen in den April 1913, als das Luftschiff Z Römisch 4 die Orientierung verlor und in Frankreich notlanden musste. Es entstand ein Konflikt um Grenzverletzung, Spionage und nationales Prestige, der zu einem Wettstreit um die militärische Dominanz am Himmel führte. Klingt spannend, also verpassen Sie nicht der Lunéville-Zwischenfall von 1913 am 29. April hier auf dem Debatorial. Bis dahin, einen schönen Abend. Thanks again to Brazil.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Zeppelin Museum, for the opportunity. It's a pleasure.